this week on To the Contrary.
First, with the initial Democratic presidential debates done, we'll look at the impact on women candidates and issues impacting women. Behind the headlines, no more cable news. One former White House correspondent says women are turned off and tuning out.
Hello, I'm Bonnie Orbey. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, the race is on.
The first pair of Democratic debates is over. The candidates are back on the campaign trail. How, if at all, did the debates on NBC News change the race for the Democratic nomination for president?
Do you agree today that you were wrong to oppose busing in America then?
No.
Do you agree?
I did not oppose busing in America.
Well, there was a failure of states to integrate public schools in America.
The second night included many of the more popular candidates, with 4 of the 5 frontrunners. Between the two nights, 20 of 24 candidates, 6 of whom were women, took to the stage. But men joined in on so-called women's issues, including gender equality and equal pay.
Passed the Equal Rights Amendment.
I am the only candidate who has passed a law protecting a woman's right of reproductive health.
There's 3 women up here that have fought pretty hard for a woman's right to choose.
Most people support Roe versus Wade. We need to make that federal law.
Thank you.
We spoke with Representative Tulsi Gabbard about the debate and what she hoped to accomplish.
My mission is to put the interests of the American people above all else, put service before self, and bring about the kind of strong, bold leadership that we need to change our foreign policy, to end these wasteful regime change wars, to end this new Cold War and arms race, and invest in serving the needs of our people.
So, Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, how did having 6 women on those 2 stages, cumulatively 2 nights in a row, change the debates?
Bonnie, before a single word was spoken in these debates, the presence of so many women on that stage signaled that a woman can become president of the United States of America.
Yep, I kept thinking, I wish a Republican stage could look like this one.
I was delighted because I also think that the diversity of viewpoints showed that all women do not think alike.
It definitely normalized the presence of women in a presidential election. You know, even like when Mayor Pete Buttigieg just casually referenced that he has a husband. You know, in these things, women should not be a special interest group. They should just be another category of person who, if they work hard enough, are equally represented on that debate stage.
But is it because of the Democrats being able to put on a show like this, having 6 out of 20 or 22 candidates out there being female? Is that why they usually win the women's vote 10 to 20 points, or at least the single women's vote, not white married women's vote, but single women's vote by 10 to 20 points?
Well, in small part, I think that Republicans have failed to message and explain why things like capitalism and why free markets work. You know, the Republican Party has been lazy in messaging since the Bush era, and Democrats have been a lot better at sort of capturing the youth vote, and they've made the affirmative case that that more government intervention is better for women. That's something I disagree with, but the fact is Democrats have worked harder at getting that vote.
Do you think Kamala Harris, as many in the media, either made great strides toward or actually even became the front runner after her dispute on Thursday night with Senator Biden?
Well, I think what she did was to find a legitimate way to put race on the table. Now, remember, there's another very talented African-American running as well. And by finding a way to do it without being demagogic about it, particularly considering that black women are the largest number of, or the largest category of Democratic voters, that certainly was good for her. And it was good for her, too, because look who seems to be capturing the imagination of African Americans, of the front runner, Biden, not the 2 black candidates.
Do you think a lot of African Americans have changed their minds about particularly women after the debates this week?
I do not. In fact, I think that what you're seeing is the front. When you see where people stand, including where African Americans stand, watch out, Joe Biden. I think what you're seeing first impressions only.
You know, it's so interesting too, and I thought that Harris sort of surprised me. I don't always agree with everything that all the women on the stage were saying last night, but what came through was a distinct difference from the last rounds of the last election, where Hillary Clinton was sort of criticized for being somewhat robotic and not really speaking from the heart. And I think what came out last night were these were women who were speaking from the heart. I mean, Kamala Harris, obviously nobody goes up there unprepared, but she was speaking like a human being, and it was coming from somewhere real. And I think that is going to resonate with voters. I think the reason that Donald Trump did so well is that he tapped into something real for people, whether or not you agreed with it or not. And she did something that was extraordinary in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's so exciting about this is that you do see a multiplicity of women arguing a lot of different ideological perspectives. And it is true that when you look at the Democratic Party, you know, in 2016, they polled 54% of the women's vote, but in 2018, they polled 59% of the women's vote. And I think as we look toward 2020, it's going to be so important for the Democrats to show that it means something to have a woman in leadership on the ticket. I think both African Americans and women are largely suffering a little bit of post-traumatic stress in the sense that what has happened in the wake of President Barack Obama and in the wake of Hillary Clinton was this sense that maybe the country couldn't handle it. And there is this sort of nostalgia or belief that maybe Vice President Joe Biden could relitigate 2016 and solve all those problems. But as we see somebody like Senator Harris really break out, I think everyone will sort of reassess that initial impression.
I wouldn't call Biden's campaign isn't a relitigation. It's more of a return to normalcy, because I don't think that Biden's very smart to not run on talking about the election in 2016 being stolen. He's smart to not bring up Hillary, because the fact is that she is toxic to the states that he needs it the most. Trump is president because of 80,000 voters in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. So with regards to whether or not Kamala's stunt works, we'll see. I mean, Cory Booker tried it last week in South Carolina, and morning consult polls found that Biden's still clearing some 6 out of every 10 African-American voters and are over the age of 45. And on average, he's clearing about half of the African-American electorate, according to the polls. But again, it remains to be seen. I do think, though, you know, even though the first debate was technically the more boring one, the reason why Kamala Harris's attack on Joe Biden didn't necessarily stick was because it felt staged, and we know it was staged because they were selling shirts with her face and with silicone on. The best
with a picture of her in the second grade.
Yes,
saying, I'm that kid who was bused.
The most authentic moment in any of the debates did come from a woman. It came from Tulsi Gabbard, who is crazy and is an Assad apologist, but her passion showed. You know, and it was an authentic moment when she was fighting with Tim Ryan.
Talk about breakout in a very strange way, but Gabbard, whom we interviewed, she's actually the conservative breakout candidate.
I wouldn't even call it conservative. It's more like
a lot. She got very positive reviews from some extreme right websites and commentators after Wednesday night.
And I think one of the reasons that I was struck by this in the interview here on To the Contrary was that she didn't talk about women's issues only referring to reproductive rights or workplace issues. She immediately jumped to foreign policy, which I think shows a tremendous sort of sensitivity to what women voters are interested in. And while I think the left deserves the women voters they're getting because they have put the time and the resources and the money into getting them, the right has seemed to fail to realize that gender differences are real and that may be something that is determined on foreign policy, on tax and budget, on health care. It's not just about women's issues.
But, you know, Gabbard told me she is running on foreign and military policy, though, because she feels that what President Trump is doing right now by taunting leaders, you know, overseas leaders who are clearly mentally unstable, and not that he may not be himself, but taunting people like Iran, countries like Iran, and seeming to be a fan of getting into these regional completely unwinnable Middle Eastern conflicts that he is the greatest danger to the planet.
But we have to talk about the fact that she is a military veteran. She has served.
Right, but
and so I think
because I didn't finish, but is that a way, because you're such an expert voter analyst, is that a way to appeal to women voters?
Well, look, at the end of the day, there are a couple things we have to remember. Women actually didn't come over to the Democratic Party. Women never left the Democratic Party. They had been a part of it since FDR, and they never left. It was men who, in fact, populated the Republican Party. The gender gap came about because men moved to the Republican Party. And so what we have now is, to a certain extent, between the two parties, something of a gender war around what are the priorities and what should be the focus of our national policy. And that includes, to a certain degree, foreign policy. I do think it's interesting because President Trump's kind of skittishness, I mean, his interest in kind of a more isolationist president, in fact, opens up a different avenue for some of those on the Democratic side who would like to make peace, because they can actually say, look, this president, maybe he wants to do it, he doesn't know how to do it, and he's surrounded by chicken hawks.
I would like all of your thoughts about, a couple of months ago, everyone was saying health care was the biggest issue on American voters, particularly Democratic voters' minds. Has that changed? Did this week's series of debates help change it at all?
Well, I think these debates are in part reflective of the news cycle. And I think right now there's a lot of foreign policy that's happening. There's a lot of other news. I don't think that healthcare has gone away. I don't think it will. I think there's a lot of interest in it still. And I think that the candidates want it to be an issue because it's a signature part of the Democratic platform. So seeing that this was just the first debate, I don't think we can write it off.
You are so right. Healthcare is still the #1 issue. I haven't looked at the polls, but it's clear to me it's the #1 issue. I was pleased to see so much interest in foreign affairs and military policy, but particularly after people have clung to the Affordable Health Care Act, even after the Republicans did everything they could to undermine it. Thank you, Mr. Trump. And it's more popular than ever. Still the #1 issue.
I mean, these debates should have Americans shaking in their boots when they hear serious frontrunners for the Democratic presidency claiming that they will outlaw private health insurance. Right now, Medicare reimbursement rates are 40% lower on average than private health care. So right now, effectively, the private health insurance system is subsidizing Medicare, which is not a bad thing. We want to, help out senior citizens. We want to help out people on Medicaid. If you outlaw private health insurance, and if you're issuing those level of reimbursement rates, we already have a shortage of physicians and physician assistants. It will get so much worse. It will be, and I mean, that's ignoring all of the research and development, all of the pharmaceutical problems that will come into the fact that we'll be reliant on China's R&D. But I mean, just that alone, that's why someone, I think, like Mayor Pete can make a lot of ground by, he wants a public option, which is pretty radical when you think about it. But still, that is not outlawing private health insurance, which right now, Bernie Care, which is what Kamala Harris has co-signed onto, even though she's flip-flopped back and forth saying whether or not she'd abolish private health insurance, it will. It will be illegal.
Do you think that hurt her?
Yes. I think it will hurt
her. It's a Democratic debate, though. I mean, she's
Medicare
talking
for
to
all
her
is,
base.
Medicare for all is maybe 10% of those running for president of the United States on our side, but it is larger than life because nobody knows that's going to happen anytime soon.
Well, and I think, let's face it, the question that was asked in the first debate about what would you do if Senator Mitch McConnell remains the majority leader, Medicare for all is going nowhere. So I think the reality is we have a lot more time in this election to find out really where the voters are and where the issues land.
How do you think it worked with voters to see all the white male Democrats trying to outwomen the women? I voted for equal pay. I'm the only one who...
I thought it was like an episode of Veep. I thought it was so funny. I thought you can't get any sillier than this, where everyone was like, no, I like women more, And
so the woman had to say, and by the way, I'm a woman.
I know.
Right. No, I really think it shows that on our side, we know where the voters are. And we know that nobody can win this primary without getting most of the women, I would say even a majority of the women in that primary on their side, they know it now, and they're going after them from the get-go.
But I hope that Democrats, if they are going to sort of continue to talk about some of these workplace issues, which I've always thought are very important, that we can sort of move out of a sort of 1970s style feminism and into something that's a little bit more contemporary, where we talk about sort of women owning and controlling dollars, whether it comes to paid leave or childcare, and less about sort of imposing even a greater tax burden on women so that you have to have two income earner families, and which just is going to sort of strap women down as opposed to allowing people more freedom.
One thing that drives me nuts about every single presidential election cycle is the fact that, and it's required, you know, in so many words, by our system, where you have to run to the extreme, be it left or right, during the primary season, and then you have to change completely who you are, try to pretend that nobody notices you're switching positions, and become more of a straight moderate during the general election. Except this time, I think we're seeing two candidates, Joe Biden and Tulsi Gabbard, who are not using that playbook. Will that have an impact on?
Well, I would still disagree just because random fringe people at Drudge Report like Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard is still a hardcore leftist. This is someone who views socialism through a lot more positive a lens than half of the Democratic Party.
Gabbard.
But I would argue, I would also put Amy Klobuchar in that camp. That's why I was so disappointed when Amy Klobuchar decided to co-sponsor the Green New Deal, because she has gravitas. She has the it factor. She's clever. She doesn't come across as shrill. She doesn't come across as a triad. None of the negative adjectives that get applied to women applies to Amy. But Biden is very smart, and what he has to do is he has to stand his ground. He has to stop apologizing. The second he starts apologizing, the case for his candidacy is fundamentally undermined. You know, there's no reason to vote for Joe Biden if he's just another old white guy leftist, but he's less authentic.
Look where the electorate is. Isn't it amazing that the electorate, I'm talking about the Democratic electorate, looks like it's in the middle and is not going for the far side.
Yeah.
This is within the Democratic Party itself. And that is before Joe Biden was clearly in the race. I'm not sure he's going for that. I think he's simply going for who he is. But I think all of these candidates, so many of them, better look at where the electorate is, and that they have not, in fact, been moved by either Medicaid for all or Medicare for all, or any of the rest of the far left, or what the far left is saying.
I was going to say, can I just add this one thing? We have to understand that this is an incumbent election, and that incumbent elections are fundamentally a referendum on the incumbent. There is only
virtually impossible to defeat.
Well, actually, that's not true. It's only in the modern era that we do typically re-elect incumbents. That is not true over the course of the vast majority of our history.
Right, but the only time we haven't was... the only recent time we haven't was George H.W. Bush,
and obviously Jimmy Carter.
Because of but in his case, because of a strong independent candidate siphoning votes from the Republican candidate.
So there are a whole bunch of reasons why some of those analogies hold and some don't. So I'm not going to actually take all that on. But what I will say is this. What is the most important thing to look at as you are looking at this election is ask yourself, in the states where Donald Trump won, what his disapproval rating was in 2016, and in fact, it was in the mid-30s. His approval rating, still in the mid-40s, but his disapproval, a lot of people were, oddly enough, weirdly indifferent to him. And in fact, if you look at where his disapproval rating is in those same states, Michigan and even Iowa and Pennsylvania and the like, you see that his disapproval rating is now up in the 55%. Those people are not going to be interested in continuing Donald Trump's presidency. And that's where this election is about two bases turning out the maximum number of people they possibly can to try to overwhelm with turnout.
The electorate has already reinforced your point by flipping the House of Representatives.
Well, and also, but you know, it's always last minute GOTV, right? Get out the vote. Let us know what you think, because people are angry, but are they angry enough to get out of the, off their couches and to the voting booths? That's always a major question. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Urbay or at To The Contrary. Behind the headlines, do you feel the news media are too loud and conflict-driven? You're not alone, especially if you're a woman, says Jessica Yellin, who was chief White House correspondent for CNN until 2013.
When I've talked to women in sort of surveys to find out what they want from the news, a big thing a lot of them say is just stop shouting at me. There's a large audience that doesn't regularly watch the news. Or I call them news avoiders who seek out news and then put it down, pick it up and then turn it on and turn it off, because they just react negatively to the tone. When I give speeches to groups of women, a lot of times I'll ask them, their news habits, and they'll go, I can't even. It's like, I can't listen to the screaming. I can't take the outrage.
Yellin says having more women in newsrooms could be the tonic for this kind of coverage.
So a political story that would be about rhetoric and competition suddenly becomes, how is this policy going to impact you at home? And that resonates differently. And it's also framed in a more of a, I'd say with less of the conflict that's implicit in a lot of our political reporting. My suspicion is, were we to alter our political reporting a bit to make it more human-centered and less panic-inducing, the appetite for political coverage among women would rise.
She says her calls for a quieter approach were shot down by her male bosses, so she left CNN and took to Instagram to deliver the news in a way she says is more level-headed and more informative.
I call it news without a panic attack. My goal is to leave you with a greater sense of understanding. And if you understand better when you're done, there's a better chance that you're going to engage on that story in the future, that you'll pick up a paper or watch a show about it, that you'll talk about it, and that you'll feel confident and empowered to act.
A survey out last year by the Hebrew University of Jerusalem reported that so-called horse race coverage increases cynicism without helping voters stay informed. But it also found this type of news does not decrease voter participation. In fact, Americans are becoming more interested in presidential elections. A new NBC Wall Street Journal poll shows almost 7 in 10 Americans rate their interest in the election as a 9 or 10 out of 10. That's up from 6 in 10 in the previous electoral cycle.
So, Lara Brown, are in fact women tuning out as far as you know, and is it because of the so-called horse race style coverage?
There's a couple different things going on. One, we do have a large number of people in this country who do not pay attention to the news. It is not something that is interesting or salient in their life. And I think there is a need for, and there is a vacuum in this space that I think Jessica Yellin is trying to provide, which is information. What has happened? How do we inform without being in this world of kind of opinion editorial all the time? That's one aspect. But I do think it's important to realize why the media does what they do is because this confrontation, conflict, game framing is in fact very entertaining to a huge number of Americans.
It's also way less expensive than investigative or even just full background reporting, and and they're all up against it financially. That's another reason, as far as I can tell.
Absolutely, but the thing that she did say that I think is important is people like people. So I do think that one of the things that the media is right about is, even if the horse race coverage isn't so great for our knowledge, she is right about the fact that people's stories matter. And I think there is a long way that the media could go toward engaging people around people.
Yeah, I think that this is interesting, and I think we might be in a period of sort of a change right now, because there was a period not very long ago where research was showing that women were definitely tuning things out, that in fact it was having a distinct impact on women running for office, because they thought that the noise of the 24-hour news cycle would mean that they couldn't get their message out. Certainly that was not the case in 2018. Right? Records number of Democratic women ran for office, records number of women ran out to vote. So we may be sort of experiencing a change, and I think part of that is also the fact that we have so many more news outlets. So if you don't like some of the cable news shows, you can turn into To the Contrary, where we have more civilized conversation, right? There is something, right? There is something for everyone out there. So I think that may be sort of helping shift things a bit.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, I'm not sure I agree here. I think that, yes, women don't like this fist fighting. as much. But given the last election, I don't think they were tuned out by it. And I also think that the notion of the competition it riles people up. And that's what politics is all about. The competition is all about in the football game, and it's all about competition in the girls' soccer game, too. So I don't think you can get rid of that in American politics.
Yeah, 20 seconds, but close out.
Maybe I'm the anomaly, but I love the fight. My issue with a lot of cable news isn't about the belligerence. I love that. I want blood. It's more the issue of, I turned on CNN after the Mueller report came out. I read all 440 pages of it. Why were there 9 people who had not read the Mueller report reporting on the Mueller report immediately after it was released?
All right,
I think that's
we're
why my
out of time.
Podcast.
I'm sorry, but thank you very much. That's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/tothecontrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.
Funding for To the Contrary provided by the Cornell Douglas Foundation, committed to encouraging stewardship of the environment, land conservation, watershed protection, and eliminating harmful chemicals. Additional funding provided by the Wallace Genetic Foundation, the Colcom Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation. For a transcript or to see an online version of this episode of To the Contrary, please visit our PBS website at pbs.org/To the Contrary.
Be more. PBS.